We are joined now by Radosław Sikorski, member of the EU Parliament, former Polish Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for finding the time to call in. What's Russia's view on the current conflict? How do you view Polish relations with Ukraine and Przydach's statement on how Poland can live without Ukraine, whereas Ukraine ought to stay in Poland's good side? How do you interpret it all?
Как вы это интерпретируете?
I'll answer your question, but let me just first salute free Russian media and all those people in Russia who do not support this war. I know it's very difficult. I know how harsh the regime is. We are in the middle of a nasty election campaign, elections due on the 15th of October, and Ukraine has become a political issue of competition between the ruling party and a far-right party, which feeds on anti-Ukrainian sentiment, which is marginal, but they are competing for 1-2% of votes. And I think it's irresponsible. I'm in opposition to the current government. I hope they lose the election. And if we win, we will repair the relations with Ukraine. There is, of course, an objective problem, namely, when Putin closed the sea route for the export of Ukrainian grain, what Poland and Romania should have done more than a year ago was to have upgraded railway facilities, storage facilities, port facilities, so that the Ukrainian grain could be taken overland to its traditional markets in Africa and Asia. Romania is doing it. Poland failed to do that and instead imposed this embargo, fighting for the rural vote. And unfortunately, our current government, instead of blaming itself, is blaming the European Union and Ukraine, which is unhelpful. And I hope it will stop after the election.
At the same time, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I have heard that say an opinion that since Poland accepted the most Ukrainian refugees than any country, there is fatigue in Polish society. I am not looking to hit this issue up, but there is a lot of discussion around it. It is talked about among experts, analysts, and journalists, including those in Poland.
There is still overwhelming sympathy for Ukraine and a wish for Ukraine to defend its freedom and join the European Union. But you're right. Before the war, we had 1 million Ukrainians living in Poland, and another 1 million joined them since the Russian invasion. I would compare it somewhat to what happened in Britain when Tony Blair opened the labor market and 1 million Poles settled in Britain. And of course, Britain didn't have a 15% reserve in its educational system and its health system. And you know, when you have 2 million people, inevitably some of them get sick, their children have to go to school, and facilities are stretched. So inevitably it leads to some controversies. Of course, the solution is for Ukraine to win the war and for Ukrainians to be able to go home. But there are ways of dealing with the problem, and there is European money to help Poland deal with the problem. And I hope the next government will repair Poland's relations with the European Union and will get access to massive EU funds to help both the Ukrainian refugees and the Polish people who've been affected by them.
Radosław, could you please tell us if there is fear of Russian invasion in Poland? Do you view yourself as being in a similar position to that of Ukraine? Is there a fear that such a plan might even exist in the Kremlin?
Well, the Kremlin says it has such plans. It's your former president, Medvedev, who's threatening us with nuclear war, and your generals and so on. And, you know, sorry, I'll have to say that. Historically, when the Russians threaten us, we have to believe it. But on the other hand, you know, it's not just we that overestimated the strength of the Russian army. Putin also overestimated the strength of the Russian army. and it's incapable of defeating Ukraine, let alone Poland and the whole NATO. So I don't think they would be so foolish as to start a world war with NATO. But we have to take precautions, which is why we are now arming ourselves with the full support of the opposition, because unfortunately, all those threats from the past against Georgia, against Ukraine, against Baltic states, against us, I mean, the intention is clearly there, and it's weakness that encourages, so we mustn't be weak.
Radosław, along with placing an embargo on Ukrainian grains, Poland now prohibits entry into the country on cars with Russian license plates. That is, sanctioning average Russians. And those were not the first restrictions against average Russians. Simultaneously, when elections and farmers are in question, Warsaw easily goes against Ukrainian interests. Don't get me wrong, but this sounds contradictory and paradoxical even. I would like to understand what the advantages of such restrictions are. How do you explain it? Are you in support of such measures?
Именно такого рода.
I'm actually not all that familiar with the issue of cars, and I don't think it's a Polish invention. I think it happens in other EU countries as well. It's a particular interpretation of sanctions imposed by the EU on the export of goods from Russia, I think. On the whole, I am against sanctioning innocent people.
Относительно того, наступит ли когда-нибудь момент...
Here, your opinion would be especially valuable. Do you think the attitude towards Russian nationals in Europe will ever change? Today, it appears every Russian is responsible for what's going on. Everyone, including those that never supported Putin or voted for him. I mean, a war is going on. Do you think there is a chance that the attitude towards Russians will change? It is especially interesting to ask you as a Pole.
It's a complex issue, okay? Let me tell you what happened to me personally. I work partly in Strasbourg, one of the two seats of the European Parliament. In a break between sessions, I went to see the cathedral. I went to the top of the tower, and there were a couple of Russians speaking loudly. And so to test whether they were Russian or Ukrainians, perhaps, I said, Slava Ukraini. And they launched at me saying, what do you mean Ukraine? There is no such thing as Ukraine. And I said, well, if you support the war, why don't you go back to Russia? And they said, oh, actually, we're not from Russia, we are from Latvia. So these were ethnic Russians with EU citizenship living in Latvia and benefiting from the freedoms of the West, and yet spouting regime fascistic propaganda, which makes me think that some Russians still support the rebuilding of the Russian Empire. This is the key. We need to be persuaded that the Russian people are happy to live within their own border, that they want to take care of their own country, and they don't give themselves the right to dominate over other people or to say that other nations are not real nations. And we need to be persuaded that the time of colonial wars, of conquests, of crossing international borders is over, and that the Russian people truly understand that this invasion was a mistake, it's a crime, that it's bad for Russia, and that Russia needs to take a different path. Look, I am criticized in Poland for wanting reconciliation with Russia. We had the patriarch of Russia come to Warsaw and sign an agreement, an appeal with our bishops for the reconciliation of the Polish people and the Russian people. And I supported it as foreign minister. And the same man now says that it was all right to invade Donbas to protect the people of Donbas from equality parades, which is completely unacceptable according to European civilization. You can't start wars on such pretexts. So I think a normalization is possible, but we need to be persuaded that Russian people do not support the Russian Empire.
What are your thoughts on the upcoming presidential elections in Russia, Radosław? 2024 is upon us, and many Russian politicians say that those aren't real elections, they're make-believe elections. It's an imitation. Actual elections in Russia are impossible, and there is only one candidate. How do you think Europeans should respond to this phenomenon? For example, will you recognize the outcome of this, let's call it, an expression of the people's will?
Well, we have a saying about elections like that. We don't know who is going to win, but we know who will be in power. Look, the current Russian government is a traitor to the interests of Russia. In Russia's interest, it is to be an ally of the West, to protect Siberia for Russia. You are weakening, this current regime is weakening your country, trying to gain Kyiv, and it might lose Vladivostok, mark my words, which the Chinese are again calling Hanshenvei. If I were a Russian patriot, I would be furious at Putin for exposing Russia to defeat and to weakness and to becoming a vassal of China. That's a terrible prospect for Russia, but also not good for us. So we are waiting until Russia admits to itself that the invasion of Ukraine was a mistake, cuts its losses, like European empires before, like the French, like the British, like the Portuguese before. For them, the process of losing their empires was also very painful, and it required a mental readjustment. Russia needs to do that, and the sooner it happens, the better.
Thank you very much, Radosław. I hope this isn't the last time we meet here on TV Rain to discuss the various events and processes that are certainly concerning to everyone. This has been Radosław Sikorski, member of the EU Parliament, former Polish Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as ex-marshal of the same.
Сейма.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.